Before the first empires, before the wheel, the plough, or the pen, before the names of kings and the counting of years, there was another world, a world we do not remember, but a world that remembers us. Its remnants live not in textbooks or museums, but in myth, in ruins, in the whispers of ancient tongues long buried beneath sand and sea. Today, we call it the pre-Diluvian world, the world before the flood. But the flood is more than water, it is forgetting. A tidal wave of time that washed away an entire chapter of humanity's story and left us wondering, what came before? Who were they? And what did they know that we've forgotten? Across the world, from Mesopotamia to the Amazon, from the Himalayas to the Sahara, hundreds of cultures carry the same tale, a great flood sent by gods or nature to erase a world that had gone astray, a world of titans and sages, of lost cities, of towering knowledge and unspeakable hubris. Some say it was punishment, others a cycle, the end of one age and the beginning of another, but the core remains unchanged. Humanity was not always as it is today. We are the children of survivors, the sons and daughters of those who rebuilt, and perhaps we are haunted by the memory of a civilization older than memory itself. Think of the names we used to speak of it: Atlantis, Lemuria, Tepi, the first time, the Golden Age. Each a different name for a forgotten world, a lost chapter, a place where knowledge walked like a god and humanity stood at the edge of something extraordinary. And then it fell. But here's the mystery. These stories are not confined to one culture. They do not belong to a single people or a single era. From the Book of Genesis to the Epic of Gilgamesh, from the Popol Vuh to the Vedas, the story is retold again and again with eerie precision. Different languages, different continents, same flood. Is it coincidence? Is it memory? Or is it something else entirely? The waters of the flood are symbolic, yes. But what if they are also real? 11,600 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, Earth was struck by cataclysmic floods. Massive glacial lakes burst their boundaries. Sea levels surged by hundreds of feet. Whole coastlines vanished. Geologists call it Meltwater Pulse 1b. But the ancients remembered it as something else. The wrath of the gods, the day the sky fell, the end of a forgotten age. Today, we're taught that civilization began only 6,000 years ago, that history begins with the first writing, that before agriculture, humans were simple, tribal, and scattered. But what if we are looking through a keyhole, a narrow crack in time, showing only a glimpse of what came before? What if everything we know about the past is just the beginning? In recent years, evidence has begun to surface, sometimes literally, that suggests a far older human story. Göbekli Tepe, a megalithic temple complex predating agriculture by thousands of years, built with precision we still can't fully explain. Submerged structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and Cuba, hinting at cities swallowed by ancient seas. Artifacts, maps, and myths that point toward knowledge astronomical, mathematical, even technological, out of step with their supposed time. Are these anomalies, or are they breadcrumbs? This journey is not just about archaeology. It's about something deeper. Memory, not personal memory, but civilizational memory, the kind passed down through symbol, story, and ritual, carried across millennia by priesthoods, shamans, myth makers, guarded in temples, caves, and dreamscapes. Even now, our greatest myths speak of a time before time, the Garden of Eden, lost to exile, the Sanskrit Satya Yuga, an age of light before decline, the Sumerian kings, who ruled for thousands of years before the flood, the Hopi's third world, drowned by water as we await the fifth. They speak of beings who taught humanity, of gods, watchers, Atlanteans, Anunnaki, Titans. Were these metaphors? Were they memories of advanced humans? Or something more. In this series, we will journey through these shadows, not to prove, but to wonder, not to preach, but to explore. Because the greatest sin of modern history may not be forgetting facts, but forgetting that we once knew how to ask better questions. What if we are not the peak, but the echo? What if humanity is older, stranger, more cyclical than we ever imagined? What if the greatest wisdom is buried beneath the floodwaters of time? We will visit sunken temples, decode ancient myths, listen to the elders, challenge the official timelines, and walk the narrow path between history and memory, between what was and what might have been. So open your mind, set aside certainty, and come with me into the world before the world, into the pre-Diluvian age, where the oldest stories may be the truest, and where the waters of forgetting are beginning to recede. Before memory, before kings, before the first word carved into stone, there was water, not the life-giving streams or the calm tide of the morning shore, but a sea with no edge, a flood with no mercy, a silence so total it drowned not only cities, but the very idea of civilization. And yet, in the forgotten corners of the world, that silence speaks again, whispered in sacred texts, carved into monoliths, passed down around firesome memory, too persistent to be coincidence. This is the story of the Great Flood, not one flood, but many, told by hundreds of cultures, on every continent, long before the age of satellites and global contact. The question is not whether a flood occurred, but why the memory of it never left us. Flood myths are among the most universal stories ever told. Over 200 cultures, spanning millennia and geography, have passed down tales of a vast deluge. Some speak of it as punishment, some as rebirth, some as a cleansing, some as a forgetting. Yet the pattern remains. Let us begin where many scholars do, Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization. In this Sumerian epic, predating the Bible by a millennium, the god Enlil grows angry at humanity's noise. He sends a great flood to silence them. Only one man, Utnapishtim, is warned by the god Ea. He builds a massive boat, gathers animals, survives the storm, and releases birds to find dry land. Does that sound familiar? In the Hebrew Bible, God, saddened by human corruption, sends a flood. Only Noah, blameless in his generation, is chosen to build an ark. He too brings animals. He too releases birds. He too finds a mountain after the waters subside. Thousands of years apart, different languages, different gods, same archetype. But the resonance doesn't stop there. In the Hindu tradition, Manu, the progenitor of mankind, is warned by a fish, Matsya, who is the god Vishnu in disguise. Manu builds a boat, survives a cosmic flood, and from him, the world is repopulated. In Mesoamerican myths, the gods destroy previous worlds through various means, one of which is a flood. In one version, a man and woman survive by hiding inside a hollow tree or mountain and repopulate the earth. The Ojibwe, the Choctaw, the Cree, and many other tribes speak of a great water that once covered the earth. The animals dive to find mud to rebuild the land atop a turtle's back. This story, known as Turtle Island, is remarkably detailed and symbolic. In ancient China, the flood myth centers not on destruction, but on human perseverance. The hero, Yu the Great, spends decades taming the waters, becoming a civilizing force. The flood is not punishment, but a test of order versus chaos. From Australia's Aboriginal stories to Polynesian sea myths, from Norse flood tales to sub-Saharan African legends, the theme endures. Why does this pattern recur? These cultures were oceans apart. They did not trade stories, build temples together, or share languages, and yet they dreamt the same flood. Let us examine the key motifs. 1. Divine displeasure or cosmic reset. Most myths begin with imbalance. Human corruption, cosmic disharmony, or divine wrath. The flood becomes a tool not of chaos, but of reset. A cleansing of the world. 2. The chosen survivor, a lone righteous man, couple, or small group is warned. They are given knowledge, often by a god, animal, or dream, and told to build a vessel. These survivors become the new seed of humanity. 3. Signs from the sky or birds as messengers. The use of birds, doves, ravens, swans, is ubiquitous. They are symbols of return, of scouting for dry land. But they also represent spirit, intuition, the connection between earth and sky. 4. The sacred knowledge. Survivors sometimes carry not just life, but wisdom, records, seeds, sacred texts, or secret language. The implication is that not only was life rebooted, but culture was preserved in fragments. 5. The mountain of safety. The vessel rests atop a high place, Ararat, Nisia, Himalayas. Symbolically, the peak is the closest place to the divine. It represents transcendence, refuge, and rebirth. So what does this mean? Were there actual floods that inspired these myths? Or is the deluge a metaphor, one so powerful it shaped human memory itself? Geologists and historians suggest there were indeed cataclysmic floods. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, saw sea levels rise by over 400 feet. Vast coastlines disappeared. Entire landscapes changed. Could that ancestral trauma have echoed through generations as myth? Some point to events like the flooding of the Black Sea Basin, the melting of the North American ice sheets, sudden climate shifts that drowned coastal settlements. We will explore these further in later chapters. But there is another, deeper possibility, one not measured in sediment but in symbol. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung believed in what he called archetypes, primordial symbols embedded in the collective unconscious. Water to Jung represented the unconscious mind, the womb, the source of life, but also of death, a place of transformation, purification, and rebirth. In dreams, floods often represent emotional overwhelm, deep change, or the urge to purge the past. Could it be that flood myths do not simply remember a physical event, but encode a psychological truth? That sometimes civilizations, like individuals, must forget in order to evolve, must be submerged in the unknown, must lose the known world so they can learn to rebuild. Jung might say the flood myth is not history, it is initiation. If the flood myth is universal, perhaps it is not a memory of the past, but a blueprint for transformation. A spiritual technology disguised as story, destruction, rebirth, forgetting, remembering, loss, evolution. In this sense, the Ark is not just a boat, it is the vessel of the soul, carrying the sacred through the darkness. The mountain is not just refuge, it is initiation, the high place of the spirit. And the waters, they are not punishment, they are invitation to let go, to dissolve what no longer serves, to enter the unconscious and come out changed. What if the flood happened, not just once, but many times? What if civilization is older than we think, rising and falling like the tides? What if the stories we tell are not just myths, but encrypted memories of something our ancestors could not explain, but could never forget? Maybe the real question isn't, did the flood happen? Maybe it's, why do we still remember it? Even in our dreams, even in our DNA, even in the silence that comes before the storm. When the floodwaters came, they did not only drown the wicked, they threatened to erase everything: memory, language, song, time. But the flood was not total. It never is. Across the world, in myth after myth, a vessel survives. A strange container, sometimes a boat, sometimes a box, sometimes a living being carrying the seed of something precious. It is not always the strong who are saved, not the powerful or the loud, but the keeper of memory, the bearer of story, the chosen one, not for muscle, but for meaning. This is the story of the Ark and what it truly carried. Let's return to the myths we touched before. The story is familiar. Noah builds an ark as instructed by God. It's a rescue mission, but not just for survival. He's told to bring 2 of every kind, a curated ecosystem. He brings his family, a microcosm of humanity. He carries the blueprint of civilization. When he lands, he does not just survive. He plants a vineyard. He rebuilds. Utnapishtim is warned by the god Ea. The boat he builds is massive, structured with 7 decks, symbolic of sacred order. He carries craftsmen, animals, and seeds. After the flood, he is granted immortality, not just physically, but in story. In the Hindu tradition, Manu saves not just animals, but Vedas, the sacred scriptures. He protects spiritual knowledge, rituals, and laws. The boat becomes a floating temple, guided by a god in disguise. The message is clear. In each story, the Ark is not only salvation, it is a carrier of meaning. Not just bodies, but symbols. Not just life, but culture. Let us take a step back. What is an ark? At its root, it is a container, a sealed, sacred vessel, something set apart from the chaos outside. In mythology, it can be a boat on floodwaters, a box hidden underground, a temple on a mountain, a scroll wrapped in leather, even a person bearing wisdom in their soul. In each form, the ark has 2 essential traits. It preserves something valuable. It survives catastrophe. Think of today's equivalents: time capsules, data backups, cryogenic vaults, seed banks beneath the Arctic ice, satellites carrying the golden record into deep space, all modern-day arks. Perhaps the mythic ark was not a fantasy, but an ancestral memory of real efforts to protect knowledge when disaster loomed. In the biblical tradition, there is not one ark. There are 2. Noah's Ark, which carries life, and the Ark of the Covenant, which carries law. One is a boat, the other a box, yet both are sealed, sacred, and dangerous if opened improperly. Both are touched only by the chosen. Both are surrounded by divine instruction. Could they be 2 versions of the same idea? One biological, one informational. Think also of the Egyptian myths. The Benben stone, kept within the sacred temple of Heliopolis, capsule of divine origin. Or the Sumerian Me tablets, granted by the gods to kings. Tablets that contain the instructions for building civilization itself, law, music, agriculture, worship. Stored in stone, carried by chosen hands, returned after the flood. The ark, then, is not just a boat. It is an operating system for the soul, a divine backup drive. Let us entertain a possibility not to claim, but to explore. What if some ark myths remember more than metaphor? What if, during the chaos of rising seas and collapsing ice, ancient humans did attempt to preserve something? Could there have been libraries lost beneath the waves? Sunken cities like Dwaka in India, Yonaguni off the coast of Japan, the mysterious Bimini Road near the Bahamas, or even whispered legends of Atlantis. If we remove the modern filter, the ark may have been a stone chamber in the mountains, a sealed cave upholding scrolls, a floating temple with encoded knowledge, even myth itself, shaped to hold memory across time. Perhaps the flood was a real trauma, and the ark was the desperate hope that something could survive after. Not the world as it was, but a seed of what it could be again. Let's now turn inward, to Jung and the symbolic psyche. If the flood represents the unconscious, and the collapse of the old self, then the ark is the ego's lifeboat. It's the core self that carries our most vital truths through crisis. Think of moments in your life when everything fell apart, what survived? Some memory, some insight, some story you clung to. That was your ark. In dreams, the boat is often the womb, a place of protection during transformation. In alchemy, the vessel, the vas hermeticum, is where the great work takes place. Darkness, dissolution, then rebirth. The ark in this view is not historical, it's existential, a secret chamber in the soul, where we keep our essence, even as the world breaks around us. But if arks were real and some knowledge did survive, why don't we remember more? Why is so much forgotten? Perhaps the truth is this: some knowledge was too dangerous, some too sacred, some too easily misunderstood. So it was hidden, encoded in symbols, buried in myths, passed only from master to initiate, parent to child, poet to listener. Not all survived, but some fragments remain, ancient stories we still tell, sacred geometry found in temples across oceans, myths of lost ages and golden men, and strange anomalies we cannot quite place. Each one a shard of the ark, floating still, waiting to be understood. In the end, every civilization builds its own ark. We store what we love, what we fear losing, what we think might matter after us. For some, it's DNA. For others, sacred chants. For some, algorithms. For others, a myth. The question is not whether the flood will come again. In some form, it always does. The question is, what will we carry into the future? And will anyone know how to open it? It begins, as so many myths do, in a fragment, a voice echoing across millennia. The philosopher Plato, writing around 360 BCE in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, delivers a tale from the distant past, a great island empire called Atlantis, which once existed beyond the Pillars of Heracles today, the Strait of Gibraltar. In Plato's account, Atlantis was a vast and powerful civilization. It possessed advanced technology, an ideal society, and immense military strength. It launched wars against other parts of the world, including ancient Athens. But because of its pride and moral decay, it incurred the wrath of the gods. In a single day, a night of misfortune, the island sank into the sea. Plato was careful to frame the story as one passed down through generations, allegedly told to the Athenian statesman Solon during his travels to Egypt, where priests recounted their ancient records. This account, already ancient to the Greeks, described an event 9,000 years prior. Is this history? Is it allegory? Or is it something in between? Many scholars have argued that Plato invented the tale of Atlantis to serve a moral and political purpose. In Critias, Atlantis stands as a foil to the idealized ancient Athens, democratic, virtuous, and resistant to imperial corruption. According to this interpretation, Atlantis was not real. It was a philosophical cautionary tale, a civilization that, despite its greatness, collapsed under the weight of hubris. And yet, the detail is excessive. Plato describes the geography of the island, the concentric rings of land and water, the vast plains surrounded by mountains, the central Acropolis, the metal orichalcum, and the canal system engineered to connect temples, gardens, and palaces. This is no vague metaphor. This is world building. Even if Plato embellished or invented much of it, could he have drawn from older stories, long forgotten oral traditions, or garbled historical records preserved by Egyptian priests? One of the most grounded theories ties Atlantis to the Minoan civilization, which flourished on the island of Crete and the nearby island of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE. The Minoans were among the first advanced civilizations in Europe. They had writing, linear A, paved roads, multi-story buildings with plumbing, and a sophisticated maritime economy. Then, in a geologic instant, their world exploded. The eruption of the Thera volcano, one of the largest in recorded history, devastated the region. Ash clouds, tsunamis, and climate disruption followed. Coastal cities were buried or washed away. Could this be the real Atlantis? It fits in many ways. Sudden destruction by natural forces, an advanced Bronze Age society, proximity to Egypt and Greece, where the story was recorded. But there are problems. The dates don't match Plato's timeline. And while Thera was catastrophic, Crete itself survived for some time afterward. Still, this hypothesis remains one of the most academically respected. It suggests that Plato may have taken a real historical event and mythologized it into a grander narrative. Around 1200 BCE, civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean fell almost simultaneously. The Hittite Empire vanished, the Mycenaeans declined, the Egyptian Empire contracted, Ugarit and other city-states were burned and abandoned. Historians still debate the causes of this late Bronze Age collapse. Famine, earthquakes, invasions, and trade disruption all played a role. A mysterious group called the Sea Peoples appears in Egyptian inscriptions, portrayed as seafaring invaders from unknown lands. Could the story of Atlantis be a poetic remembrance of this broader collapse? Perhaps Atlantis was not a single city, but a mythic representation of an era that disappeared into the sea of time. This interpretation turns Atlantis into a symbol of forgotten civilizations, lost not just to water, but to entropy, migration, and war. Now we drift further into speculative waters. Some alternative researchers propose that Atlantis was not in the Mediterranean, but far to the south beneath the ice of Antarctica. The theory goes like this. At some point in the past, the Earth experienced a rapid pole shift, displacing continents and triggering global cataclysms. This idea, sometimes attributed to Charles Hapgood, and later echoed by authors like Graham Hancock and Rand Flemath, suggests that Antarctica was once ice-free and habitable. Supporters point to the Piri race map, a 16th century naval chart that seems to depict a coastline resembling an ice-free Antarctica, supposedly copied from much older sources. Critics argue that these connections are tenuous at best. There is no conclusive geological evidence for a pole shift in human timescales, and most mainstream historians dismiss the Piri race claims as misinterpretation. But the allure remains. Antarctica is the most inaccessible and least understood continent. What lies beneath the ice is still largely a mystery. Another popular hypothesis is that Atlantis was part of a lost Ice Age civilization. Human prehistory stretches far beyond written records. Around 12,000 years ago, the world was emerging from the last glacial maximum. Sea levels were 100 meters lower. Entire coastlines and island chains now submerged would have been habitable. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey dated to 9,600 BCE. Matching Plato's timeline suggests that humans were organizing complex religious or social structures far earlier than previously believed. Could Atlantis have been a seafaring culture, thriving along Ice Age coastlines that were later swallowed by rising seas? Proponents argue that myths from all over the world preserve dim memories of a pre-flood age. Lemuria, Kumari, Kandam, Mu, and Atlantis may all be echoes of this vanished chapter of human history. Critics demand more concrete evidence. No definitive ruins, no written records, no artifacts. But if such a civilization was coastal, the rising seas would have buried its traces under silt and salt millennia ago. The mainstream academic consensus remains skeptical. Plato's story is treated as allegory unless further archaeological evidence is uncovered. Geologists point out there is no sign of a sunken island in the Atlantic matching the description. But defenders of the theory argue that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially for a civilization that may have existed over 10,000 years ago, before known writing systems. Notable researchers and thinkers have championed a re-evaluation of ancient myths. Graham Hancock, who sees myth as a vessel of real memory, Ignatius Donnelly, whose 19th century book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World popularized the idea, Rand Flemath, advocating the Antarctic Atlantis theory, Charles Hapgood, whose pole shift theory intrigued even Einstein. They call for open-minded inquiry, for not dismissing myth outright, but decoding it. In this view, Atlantis is not a fantasy, but a fragment, a broken shard of a mosaic we have only begun to reconstruct. Whether real or imagined, Atlantis will not die. It persists in our collective imagination because it speaks to something primal, the fear of collapse, the seduction of forgotten glory, the dream of a world before the fall. Atlantis is not just a lost city, it is the archetype of a lost world. It mirrors our own anxieties. Are we too on the brink of moral decay? Are our technologies outpacing our wisdom? Would we be remembered as a fable? Should we fall? Atlantis is also a promise that greatness once existed, that harmony, balance, and power might be found again. As technology allows us to map the seafloor, to scan beneath the ice, and to digitally reconstruct ancient landscapes, perhaps we are nearing a turning point. Perhaps the question is not, was Atlantis real? But what kind of truth does Atlantis contain? Geological, mythical, psychological, all three. Like a sunken bell, the myth tolls beneath the surface. It may take another generation, or several, but the echo continues. It calls to explorers, scientists, mystics, and skeptics alike. Atlantis is the world we lost. Atlantis is the world we fear to become. Atlantis is the world we hope to find again. If Atlantis is the Western world's quintessential lost civilization, then Lemuria and Mu are its eastern and esoteric cousins. Their names conjure visions of drowned temples, cosmic wisdom, and golden ages obscured beneath the sea. Unlike Atlantis, which has a clear origin in Plato's writings, Lemuria and Mu emerged from a strange fusion of 19th century science, colonial-era ethnography, and early 20th century occultism. But as with all enduring myths, there may be more at work here than pure fantasy. These tales speak of entire continents swallowed by oceans, of civilizations older than history, and of knowledge passed down through whispers, dreams, and DNA. From theosophists to Polynesian navigators, Tamil poets to geologists tracing submerged lands, the legend of Lemuria and Mu echoes across cultures and disciplines. Let us descend. The term Lemuria was coined in the mid-1800s by zoologist Philip Sclater. He noted an oddity. Lemur fossils appeared in both India and Madagascar, but not in Africa or the Middle East. To explain this distribution, he proposed the existence of a lost landmass connecting the two regions, a now submerged continent he named Lemuria. Though Sclater's theory was later dismissed with the rise of plate tectonics and continental drift, the name stuck, and more importantly, it was adopted and transformed by those outside the realm of traditional science. Enter Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. In the late 19th century, Blavatsky claimed access to esoteric knowledge derived from ancient manuscripts and spiritual beings. In her book, The Secret Doctrine, she described Lemuria not as a land of lemurs, but as the home of the third root race of humanity, a semi-ethereal, psychic civilization that predated Atlantis. According to her teachings, Lemurians were tall, hermaphroditic, telepathic beings who lived millions of years ago. They communicated through thought, harnessed cosmic energies, and ultimately fell due to spiritual corruption. Their continent was swallowed by the sea, paving the way for the Atlanteans. Critics rightly call this pseudoscience, but it had a powerful cultural effect, especially in spiritual circles, where Lemuria became a symbol of humanity's lost spiritual potential. Parallel to Lemuria, another sunken world emerged in the Western imagination, Mu. In the 19th century, Anglican missionary Augustus Le Plongeon claimed to have translated ancient Mayan texts that referenced a lost continent called Mu in the Pacific Ocean. He believed Mu was the original motherland of all advanced civilizations, including Egypt and Mesoamerica. Later, James Churchward, a British writer and former colonel, expanded on this idea in his 1926 book, The Lost Continent of Mu. Churchward claimed to have read ancient tablets in India that described Mu as a massive continent stretching across the Pacific, home to an advanced civilization that existed 50,000 years ago. According to Churchward, Mu was a paradise destroyed by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, sinking beneath the waves in a single night. Survivors allegedly fled to other parts of the world, seeding the rise of great cultures from Egypt to Polynesia. Once again, the scientific evidence is lacking, but the myth has proven tenacious. In Polynesia, stories abound of sunken lands, of ancestors from a vast homeland now lost to the sea. Long before Theosophy or Victorian mystics, Indigenous cultures had their own stories of sunken lands and vanished homelands. In Polynesian oral tradition, there are tales of Hawaii, a mystical homeland from which the ancestors came. While often interpreted symbolically, some stories describe physical islands that disappeared under the ocean. The Maori, the Hawaiians, and other oceanic peoples preserve songs and chants about these ancient migrations and lost islands. In Tamil literature, there is the legend of Kumari Kandam, a vast landmass south of India said to have been home to a great Tamil civilization. It was swallowed by the sea in a great cataclysm. Some texts suggest this was the seat of an early golden age of literature, philosophy, and governance. In Madagascar, oral traditions speak of ancestral lands to the east, now gone. And in parts of India, flood myths are ubiquitous, not unlike those found across the globe. Could these stories be mere coincidence, or do they encode distant memories of real geological upheavals? Not all lost continents are mythical. In recent decades, geologists have identified a real, submerged continental mass, Zealandia. Stretching over 4.9 million square kilometers, Zealandia lies mostly underwater, with only parts like New Zealand and New Caledonia above sea level. Scientists now consider it a true continent that broke away from Antarctica and Australia millions of years ago. Zealandia was never home to a known advanced civilization, and it likely sank slowly over vast geologic time. But its existence proves a vital point. Continents can disappear beneath the waves. Other submerged landmasses also raise eyebrows. The Doggerland region in the North Sea, once a land bridge between Britain and Europe. The Sunderland area in Southeast Asia, home to Ice Age human populations and now submerged beneath shallow seas. The Kerguelen Plateau, a drowned microcontinent in the southern Indian Ocean. These examples show that the Earth is not static. Seas rise, lands sink, civilizations built along coasts may be buried and forgotten. In recent decades, underwater discoveries have fueled speculation. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. Underwater rock formations that some believe are man-made structures, including terraces, stairs, and roads. Others argue it's natural erosion. Dwarka, India. Off the coast of Gujarat, marine archaeologists have found ruins that some identify with the legendary city of Lord Krishna. Cuban underwater city. In the early 2000s, sonar scans revealed symmetrical structures deep off Cuba's coast, but their origin remains controversial. If civilizations flourished along Ice Age coastlines, then rising sea levels over 100 meters since the glacial maximum would have inundated them. Entire urban centers could lie hidden beneath the ocean, invisible to conventional archaeology. We dismiss ancient myths at our peril. The stories of Lemuria and Mu may not be literal history, but they may preserve emotional truth, or fragments of real events transformed by time and retelling. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, universal symbols arising from the collective unconscious. Floods, lost lands, golden ages, and falls from grace recur across cultures for a reason. They are not only metaphors but also psychological realities. In this sense, Lemuria and Mu are dream memories of Earth as it once was, a world teeming with mystery, peril, and the hope of rediscovered wisdom. Today, the names Lemuria and Mu survive mostly in New Age and esoteric communities. They are invoked in meditation circles, channeled messages, and spiritual retreats. In the Hawaiian Islands, some believe Mount Shasta in California holds a portal to Lemuria. Others say that certain individuals carry Lemurian soul memories, awakened during moments of spiritual clarity or psychic resonance. While such claims lie beyond empirical testing, they speak to a longing to reconnect with a lost source of harmony, to remember who we once were. So what was Lemuria? A scientific mistake? A colonial myth? An occult revelation? A coded memory? Perhaps all of these. What matters most is that the myth endures. It endures because we still feel the rumble of shifting earth beneath our feet, because the ocean still hides more than it reveals, because our stories are often wiser than we are. Lemuria and Mu are not just lands. They are questions. What have we forgotten? What have we lost? And what ancient truths still sleep beneath the waves, waiting for us to remember? In the pantheon of Egyptian mythology, no phrase is more evocative than Tepi, the first time. It is not merely a reference to the beginning of linear time, but rather a primordial epoch, a sacred era when the gods themselves ruled the earth. In this golden age, divine beings such as Osiris, Thoth, Isis, and Horus were said to walk alongside humankind, imparting wisdom, order, and the foundations of civilization. According to Egyptian cosmology, Tepi began when the primordial waters of chaos, Nun, gave rise to the first land, often represented by the Benben stone, the cosmic mound from which life emerged. From this genesis, the god Atum arose, bringing forth creation through divine speech and intention. The cycles of kingship, Ma'at, cosmic order, and sacred architecture all stem from this mythic beginning. Unlike in modern secular thought, myth in ancient Egypt was not fiction. It was living memory, encoded in ritual, temple, and text. Tepi was not a metaphor. It was ancestral knowledge, passed down in veiled language. But is there more to this legend than allegory? Egypt's architecture is more than monumental. It is a language written in granite and limestone. Many scholars have noted the sophistication and scale of Old Kingdom structures, especially the pyramids of Giza and the Great Sphinx seem to appear in history fully formed, with no clear technological precursors. How is it that the earliest pyramids are also the most precisely engineered? Why do later attempts, such as those in the Middle Kingdom, show decline in technique and scale? The temples of Abydos, Edfu, and Dendera are filled with inscriptions that hint at Tepi and a time before dynastic kings. The walls speak of the followers of Horus, semi-divine beings who ruled Egypt before the pharaohs. Mainstream Egyptology interprets these as symbolic, but alternative researchers argue that these texts record an earlier cycle of civilization, remembered dimly across millennia. Few monuments are as mysterious as the Great Sphinx of Giza. It gazes eastward, eternally awaiting the dawn, its body leonine, its face weathered by time. In the 1990s, geologist Robert Schoch and Egyptologist John Anthony West proposed that the erosion patterns on the Sphinx were not caused by wind and sand, but by prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. This suggests the Sphinx could be thousands of years older than the traditional date of 2500 BCE. Rainfall of that intensity hasn't touched Giza since the end of the last ice age around 10,000 BCE. If true, it rewrites history. It means that someone was capable of large-scale megalithic construction during a time when humanity was supposedly just discovering agriculture. Skeptics point to lack of corroborating evidence, but the debate remains open. The erosion patterns are there. The implications are enormous. Could the pyramid complex have been inherited? Are the dynastic Egyptians the restorers rather than the originators? The ancient texts themselves seem to support this. The famous inventory Stela, found near the Great Pyramid, mentions that Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid, restored the Sphinx, which was already ancient in his time. Moreover, the architectural and mathematical precision of the pyramids hints at advanced planning and knowledge, including stellar alignment with Orion and Sirius, dimensions encoding Earth's equatorial circumference, use of the golden ratio and pi. All of this has led researchers like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval to suggest that the pyramids are part of a much older legacy remnants of a forgotten civilization that survived a cataclysm and seeded the knowledge into early dynastic culture. One of the most compelling theories linking Zep Tepi to actual astronomical events is the Orion correlation theory. Proposed by Bauval, it suggests the three main pyramids at Giza mirror the alignment of Orion's belt as it appeared around 10,500 BCE. At that date, Orion would have risen perfectly in alignment with the Giza pyramids, while the Sphinx, facing east, would have greeted the rising of Leo, the Lion constellation, during the spring equinox. This coincidence has led some to speculate that Zep Tepi refers not only to a mythical time, but to an actual epoch, marked in the stars, when the gods, or their memory, descended from Orion. This could align with similar motifs in other ancient cultures that trace their origins to sky beings or star visitors. Beyond the myths and alignments, the geometry of the pyramids suggests an intelligence beyond mere brute labor. The Great Pyramid's base perimeter, divided by its height, yields a close approximation of 2 Pei-Sol. Its dimensions reflect Earth-based measurements, such as the polar radius. The layout encodes phi, pH, the golden ratio. Some researchers argue that this is evidence of ancient scientific knowledge embedded within the stone. Not just astronomy, but harmonics, sacred geometry, and geodesy, the understanding of Earth's shape and dimensions. This aligns with the idea of Zep Tepi as a time when cosmic principles and divine order were imprinted on Earth through sacred architecture. Mainstream archaeology sees Zep Tepi as myth, but is it possible that myth is a vessel of memory? Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, recurring symbols in the collective unconscious. Could Zep Tepi be a cultural memory of a lost epoch? A time when humanity was more aligned with the cosmos, when wisdom was embodied in action, and when great knowledge was passed down in stone. Just as dreams distort but never invent, so too might myths remember. Perhaps Zep Tepi was not a fiction, but a refracted truth, passed through the lens of time, priesthood, and poetry. Whether one believes in a literal golden age or not, Zep Tepi speaks to something deep within the human spirit. The longing for origins, the memory of alignment, the dream of a time when divinity and humanity were not separate. It reminds us that the past is not always as simple as we think, that beneath every stone and behind every myth may lie a forgotten chapter in the story of who we are. And perhaps to remember Zep Tepi is to prepare for its return. Human history is written in stone, bone, and fragment, but sometimes an artifact appears where it should not be, out of place, out of time, defying conventional timelines. These enigmatic finds are often called uparts, out-of-place artifacts. Mainstream archaeology tends to reject or downplay such anomalies. They're often explained away as misinterpretations, hoaxes, or misdatings. Yet these artifacts persist in both fringe literature and the public imagination. Why? Because they provoke a fundamental question. Could our ancestors have been more advanced than we believe? Let's explore three of the most provocative examples. In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of Antikythera, Greece, pulled up a shipwreck dating to around 100 BCE. Among the statues and coins was a corroded bronze device with interlocking gears. It wasn't until X-ray tomography was applied decades later that researchers realized what they had: a mechanical analog computer capable of calculating astronomical positions, lunar phases, eclipses, and even the timing of the ancient Olympics. This device was at least a millennium ahead of its time. The Antikythera mechanism, now housed in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, represents an engineering sophistication no one expected from the Hellenistic period. The level of miniaturization, precision gearwork, and encoded astronomical knowledge suggests either a lost tradition of high engineering or a misunderstanding of ancient intellectual capacities. Where did this knowledge come from? Was it truly singular, or part of a larger legacy now forgotten? In the 1930s, excavations near Baghdad uncovered a series of ceramic jars dating to the Parthian period, roughly 250 BCE to 250 CE. Each jar contained a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic solution like vinegar or lemon juice, these devices generate voltage. Could this have been a form of ancient galvanic cell, a battery? Mainstream scholars suggest the devices may have been used for electroplating, or they could simply be misinterpreted ritual objects. But the idea of electricity in antiquity, even in crude form, is revolutionary. It opens the door to the possibility that some ancient cultures experimented with energy in ways we don't fully understand. The Baghdad battery may not prove the existence of global energy grids in prehistory, but it invites speculation. What else might have been lost to time? Drawn in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, this map is not technically an ancient artifact. However, it claims to be based on much older source maps, some potentially from Alexander the Great's era or earlier. What makes it controversial is that it appears to depict the coastline of Antarctica ice-free. Geologists generally agree that Antarctica has been under ice for thousands of years. If the Piri Reis map truly shows an unglaciated Antarctica, that would mean someone mapped it tens of thousands of years ago. Some scholars argue that what is shown is merely South America drawn in an odd style. But even so, the map exhibits a level of accuracy in longitude that Europeans supposedly couldn't achieve until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. Could this point to a legacy of global maritime knowledge, perhaps passed down through a forgotten seafaring culture? Artifacts aren't the only anomalies. Myths, too, carry knowledge that sometimes seems oddly advanced. Take Sanskrit cosmology. In ancient Indian texts like the Rig Veda and the Surya Siddhanta, we find stunningly precise astronomical data. The diameter of Earth, the distance to the Sun, the lengths of solar years and lunar months, all remarkably close to modern values. The Yugas, vast cosmic cycles that span hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, suggest a deep temporal awareness beyond any known ancient civilization. Are these just metaphors? Or do they encode real, inherited astronomical knowledge? The Dogon people of Mali, West Africa, have a rich mythological tradition. According to anthropologists Marcel Griol and Germaine Dieterlen, the Dogon have long known about Sirius B, a white dwarf companion to the visible Sirius A star. Sirius B is invisible to the naked eye and was only confirmed by Western astronomers in the 20th century. Yet Dogon oral tradition includes accurate descriptions of its orbit and density. Skeptics argue that the Dogon may have acquired this knowledge through modern contact with Europeans, but others suggest this is an example of ancient star knowledge preserved in myth. Their stories claim they were taught by Nomo, amphibious beings from Sirius. While fantastical, this aligns with similar themes worldwide, advanced beings from the stars sharing wisdom with early humanity. Taken alone, Each of these artifacts and stories might be dismissed, but together they form a pattern. Advanced technology in the distant past. Accurate celestial and geographical knowledge before it was supposedly possible. Mythic traditions that seem to encode scientific truth. If these are coincidences, they are startlingly coherent. If they are not, we are faced with two possibilities. Our ancestors were far more advanced than we credit them for. They were the heirs of an even older, forgotten civilization. Either answer challenges the linear view of history. We must ask, how much knowledge is buried beneath the sands, oceans, and dogmas of time? From the submerged ruins of Dwarka in India, to the ancient stone spheres of Costa Rica, to the unexplained sophistication of Tiwanaku and Göbekli Tepe, the world is dotted with evidence that doesn't quite fit. To dismiss these entirely is to risk discarding the missing pages of humanity's story. Perhaps the deeper message is not that we once possessed great knowledge, but that we have forgotten how to see it. In the gently rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, near the ancient city of Sanliurfa, archaeologists in the 1990s uncovered something that would quietly challenge the entire chronology of human civilization, Göbekli Tepe. This site, dated to around 9600 BCE, predates not only writing and the wheel, but agriculture and settled life itself. That single fact reshapes everything we thought we knew about the Neolithic era. It compels a re-evaluation not only of the timeline, but also of the trajectory of human development. How could such monumental complexity emerge from what we assumed was a world of wandering tribes and rudimentary tools? Towering stone pillars, many over 16 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons, were quarried, carved, and arranged in intricate circular enclosures. The stones are decorated with detailed carvings of animals, abstract symbols, and humanoid figures, not crude or primitive, but aesthetically and spiritually deliberate. Their sophistication implies not just physical effort, but intellectual vision. The question arises, who built Göbekli Tepe and why? And just how much have we misunderstood the earliest chapters of human culture? For decades, archaeologists held that monumental architecture only emerged after the advent of agriculture. This made sense. Only once humans had mastered food production, they thought, could large groups settle in one place and build temples or cities. Göbekli Tepe reverses that logic. Its builders were hunter-gatherers. They had no farms, no domesticated animals, and yet they undertook massive, complex engineering projects. This suggests not only organizational skills, but a motivating ideology or belief system strong enough to inspire such effort. It paints a portrait of mobile societies capable of cooperation, foresight, and symbolic thinking at a level we had not attributed to them. Could it be that spiritual or ritual impulses came before agriculture and not the other way around? If so, it reframes the foundations of civilization itself. Perhaps it was religion or cosmology that gave birth to cities, not grain. In that case, the roots of human society may lie not in the soil, but in the stars, myths, and shared mystery. Göbekli Tepe is often referred to as the oldest known temple complex in the world. But what kind of religion did its builders practice? The carvings suggest a symbolic worldview. Snakes, boars, vultures, foxes, and abstract forms appear in repeated patterns. There are no signs of domestic life, no hearths, no homes. It was a sacred space, not a settlement. The site seems designed for gathering, perhaps even pilgrimage. Some researchers believe the T-shaped pillars represent anthropomorphic beings, perhaps ancestors, gods, or celestial spirits. The site may have been a place of ritual death, seasonal ceremonies, or initiation rites. Perhaps it served as an axis mundi, a center point between the earthly and the divine. Its builders were not simply surviving, they were expressing a philosophy, weaving narratives into stone that may have encoded origin myths, seasonal rhythms, or moral cosmologies. How do hunter-gatherers with no known means of heavy transport or writing organize something this massive? There are several possibilities. Our assumptions about pre-agricultural societies are deeply flawed. There was a forgotten level of social cohesion or technology at work. Göbekli Tepe may have been built by the remnants or inheritors of a previously unknown, sophisticated culture. Some theorists propose the existence of a lost civilization that emerged after the Younger Dryas Impact event, a cataclysmic cooling period around 10,800 BCE, and that Göbekli Tepe is one of its final echoes. If so, we must consider that human history may have experienced multiple rises and falls, waves of progress lost beneath millennia of sand and silence. What other ruins, forgotten stories, or shards of genius might still lie buried beneath our assumptions? Several researchers have proposed that Göbekli Tepe aligns with astronomical features. Some enclosures may have been oriented to track celestial bodies such as Sirius, or to mark solstices and equinoxes. The idea that prehistoric humans tracked the stars in such detail defies the primitive label. Instead, it suggests a deeply ingrained cosmology. Perhaps the builders saw the sky not merely as backdrop, but as sacred script, a celestial archive. Were these monuments calendars, star maps, portals to the divine? Could they have encoded mythic cycles, birth, death, rebirth patterns, or galactic timelines? The very idea that these alignments were intentional implies a conceptual framework of time and space as rich as any in later civilizations. Göbekli Tepe then becomes not just archaeology, it becomes archaeoastronomy, theology, and philosophy. Perhaps most fascinating is that Göbekli Tepe was not destroyed by erosion, war, or time. It was intentionally buried. Sometime after its construction, the entire complex was methodically filled in with soil, debris, and rubble. It was hidden, preserved by design. Why would its creators go to such lengths? Was it to protect sacred knowledge, to mark the end of a forgotten era? Or was the site already ancient by the time it was buried, and its secrets no longer understood by the people who covered it? This act of erasure is itself a message. It whispers that something once vital had to be hidden, or perhaps passed down in silence. And it raises a deeper question. What else might have been buried, not by sand, but by choice? In ancient Mesopotamian and biblical texts, the Great Flood wiped clean the slate of history. Many flood myths speak of a time before the waters, when gods walked with humans, when knowledge was lost. Could Göbekli Tepe be a relic of that antediluvian world? The site's timeline coincides closely with the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of dramatic climate change and possible cosmic impact. If such a cataclysm occurred, it might have erased countless cultural sites. Göbekli Tepe, buried and preserved, may be one of the few survivors. Its symbols, its silence, its mystery, they echo faintly from the world that once was. They echo across myth and memory, into Sumerian laments, Egyptian origins, and biblical parables. Perhaps this site is the bridge, the point where legend and stone converge. Göbekli Tepe does not fit into the neat puzzle of human history. It stands outside of it as a challenge and a reminder. It reminds us that what we call progress may not be a straight line, that history may not be a ladder, but a spiral, that before the pyramids, before Sumer and Babylon, before stone tablets and plows, there were people who carved meaning into stone, who mapped the heavens, who built temples to the unknown. Their legacy endures not in what we understand, but in what continues to provoke awe. And then, for reasons we can only guess at, they disappeared into the dust of forgotten time. Göbekli Tepe stands not only as a monument of stone, but as a whisper. You do not yet know the whole story. It stands as a silent invitation to remember, to dig deeper, and to listen for voices long buried by the noise of modern certainty. Roughly 11,600 years ago, something extraordinary happened on Earth. A sudden, powerful surge of meltwater poured into the oceans from retreating glaciers, raising global sea levels by several meters in an incredibly short span of time. This event, known as Meltwater Pulse 1b, left scars on the land, changed coastlines, and possibly erased entire chapters of early human history. This was not a gentle thaw. It was violent, global, and transformative. What caused it, and what did it destroy? During the Pleistocene epoch, glaciers covered vast portions of the northern hemisphere. For tens of thousands of years, humanity lived in a world shaped by ice, cold, and constraint. Then, between 13,000 and 11,000 years ago, everything began to change. As the Ice Age drew to a close, massive ice sheets, the Laurentide in North America, the Fennoscandian in Europe, began to collapse. Vast volumes of fresh water surged into the oceans in sudden pulses, not over centuries, but in mere decades or even years. One such surge, Meltwater Pulse 1b, is believed to have caused a global sea level rise of up to 26 feet. Entire land masses would have vanished, coastlines redrawn, low-lying settlements, if any existed, swallowed whole. Rivers flooded their banks, islands disappeared beneath the sea. It was a planet-wide reset. What's remarkable is how closely this event aligns with one of humanity's oldest and most persistent stories, the Great Flood. Over 200 cultures around the world have flood myths, from the Mesopotamian tale of Utnapishtim to the biblical story of Noah, from the Hindu story of Manu to the Aztec accounts of a world destroyed by water. The patterns are astonishingly consistent. A catastrophic deluge, divine wrath or cosmic cause, chosen survivors who preserve life or knowledge, the rebirth of the world. Could these myths be cultural memories of Meltwater Pulse 1b? Did our ancestors witness oceans rising and stories of that trauma become encoded in spiritual traditions? This isn't simply poetic speculation. As researcher and author Graham Hancock suggests, myths are not nonsense, they are code. And in this case, perhaps they are code for a real, global geological event. The story becomes even more intriguing when we consider what preceded Meltwater Pulse 1b, a mysterious climatic event called the Younger Dryas. About 12,800 years ago, just as the world was warming, the climate suddenly plunged into an intense cold. Temperatures dropped sharply, glaciers expanded once more, and this cold snap lasted for over 1,000 years before abruptly ending around 11,600 years ago, just as Pulse 1b occurred. What caused this dramatic shift? Some scientists point to glacial melt disrupting ocean currents. Others suggest a more explosive theory, a cosmic impact. A comet or asteroid fragment striking Earth could have unleashed shockwaves, wildfires, and a return to Ice Age conditions. A theory supported by the discovery of microspherules, nanodiamonds, and signs of extreme burning in sediment layers. Independent researchers like Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock argue that this impact triggered not only the Younger Dryas, but eventually Meltwater Pulse 1b a 1-2 punch of climate and catastrophe. If they're right, the entire timeline of post-Ice Age civilization must be re-evaluated. Now consider this. Plato, writing of Atlantis, gave a remarkably precise date for its destruction 9,000 years before his time, placing it around 11,600 years ago. That is exactly when the Younger Dryas ended, exactly when Pulse 1b reshaped the planet. Coincidence? Or could Plato's account have been based on a long-forgotten memory preserved in Egyptian priesthoods, as he claimed? A civilization destroyed not by legend, but by rising seas and geophysical violence. This synchronization between myth, geology, and ancient texts is too compelling to ignore. Mainstream archaeology and geology traditionally embrace uniformitarianism, the idea that Earth changes slowly and incrementally. But the evidence from Pulse 1b and the Younger Dryas supports a catastrophist view where the planet occasionally undergoes rapid, devastating transformations. This challenges everything about the slow climb of human civilization. If floods, impacts, and rising seas wiped out coastal cultures, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The remains of lost civilizations could be miles offshore, under layers of silt or simply obliterated. Randall Carlson asks, if you were to lose 90% of Earth's coastlines overnight, how much history would be gone? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a profound warning. Imagine the world just before this event. Coastlines extended far beyond their present bounds. Sunderland in Southeast Asia, Doggerland in Northern Europe, the Caribbean Basin, all were above water. These now submerged regions could have hosted entire civilizations, their ruins swallowed by the sea. Scattered anomalies, like underwater structures off the coast of Japan's Yonaguni, India's Gulf of Hambat, and Cuba's submerged platforms, may be tantalizing glimpses into that lost world. Meltwater Pulse 1b didn't just change sea levels, it may have erased prehistory. Despite mounting evidence, the academic world remains cautious, if not outright resistant. Hancock, Carlson, and other alternative historians face criticism not just for their theories, but for challenging a deeply entrenched narrative that history only begins with Sumer, Egypt, and the first writing. But Meltwater Pulse 1b is not a fringe event. It's well documented. It happened, and its implications are enormous. If a cataclysm of that scale occurred during the birth of agriculture and early social complexity, it must have left its mark, even if that mark is only visible in mythology and submerged topography. What if Göbekli Tepe, built shortly after Pulse 1b, was not the start of civilization, but a memorial to something lost? What if myths of gods fleeing the flood, of knowledge saved in arks or seeds, are not metaphors, but memories? Civilization, in this view, is not a linear ascent, but a cycle of rise, fall, and remembering. The flood myths do not lie, they whisper, and Meltwater Pulse 1b may be the geological echo of their cry. We live now on a planet shaped by catastrophe. Our cities hug the coasts. Our lives depend on a stable climate. But 11,600 years ago, the Earth reminded us of its power. It flooded the lowlands, it reset the map, it pushed humanity inland, and it buried our past beneath waves and mud. Meltwater Pulse 1b is not just an event, it's a boundary, a veil between the world that was and the one we inherited. And beneath that veil, beneath the oceans, may lie the forgotten stories of who we once were. Modern history tells a story of steady ascent, from primitive beginnings to modern marvels, from caves to cities, spears to satellites, a straight line marching ever upward. But this linear story is not the only story. In fact, to many ancient cultures, it was a lie. The world, they said, does not move forward, it moves in circles. Civilizations rise and fall not once, but again and again, born, destroyed, and reborn in great cycles of time. Lost knowledge, sunken worlds, fallen ages, not exceptions but recurring truths. Is it possible that our current civilization is just one bead on a vast cosmic necklace, and that what came before was not less than us, but something different? In the Indian tradition, time is not just long, it is cosmic. Hindu cosmology divides existence into 4 yugas, each a phase in a larger cycle of spiritual and moral decline. Satya Yuga, the age of truth. A golden age where humanity lives in harmony with the divine. Lifespans are immense. Knowledge flows freely. Treta Yuga, virtue wanes, but wisdom and power remain. Dvapara Yuga, chaos grows, knowledge fragments. Kali Yuga, the current age, marked by darkness, illusion, forgetfulness. Each yuga spans thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years, forming a Maha Yuga, a complete cycle. And even that is but a blink in the life of Brahma, the cosmic being whose breath gives rise to universes. In this worldview, civilizations are not linear anomalies. They are inevitable cycles, like seasons. Each rise is preceded by a fall, and each fall followed, eventually, by renewal. We are not progressing forward. We are looping backward. Long before Rome, in the hills of ancient Greece, the poet Hesiod wrote of humanity's past in similarly cyclical terms. In Works and Days, he described 5 ages of man. Golden Age mortals lived like gods, free from toil or sorrow, no war, no suffering. Silver Age. Men lived long, but were foolish and irreverent. The gods destroyed them. Bronze Age. A brutal time of war and strife, obsessed with strength. Heroic Age. A brief resurgence, with noble warriors like Achilles and Odysseus. Iron Age. Hesiod's present. A time of corruption, hardship, and decline. Like the Hindu yugas, Hesiod's model implies moral and spiritual entropy. Humanity begins in a divine state and degenerates over time, each age a shadow of the one before. But Hesiod's poem ends with something curious. A sense of loss, yes, but also memory, as if the Golden Age were not just a myth, but a dim echo of something real. Far across the ocean, the Maya were building pyramids and watching the stars. Their calendars were not just tools to measure time, they were blueprints of cosmic cycles. The long count calendar marks a cycle of 5,125 years, known as a Baktun. The most recent cycle began in 3,114 BCE and ended in 2012 CE, prompting widespread speculation about apocalyptic prophecy. But to the Maya, 2012 wasn't an end, it was a reset. Like the precession of equinoxes in Western astrology or the turning of the yugas, the Maya understood time as recursive. Civilizations emerge, reach a peak, and collapse not due to failure, but because the wheel turns. Their mythology speaks of previous worlds, created and destroyed by the gods, civilizations erased by fire, flood, and wind. Our world is simply the latest attempt. Was the pre-Diluvian world one of these former iterations? In Timaeus, Plato tells the story of Atlantis, but what's often forgotten is how he frames it. You remember only one deluge, says an Egyptian priest to Solon. There have been many. According to the priest, civilization is not a linear ascent, but a fragile flame snuffed out repeatedly by cataclysms, floods, fires, earthquakes. What survives is not the whole story, but mere fragments passed down in myths. This idea that the past is much older and more complex than we believe reappears in the works of later thinkers, mystics, and archaeologists, and it finds a modern voice in those who challenge mainstream chronologies today. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, figures like Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists revived these ancient ideas for a Western audience. They spoke of root races and vast cycles of time, stretching back millions of years. According to this doctrine, humanity has passed through the Polarian epoch, non-physical beings of pure spirit, the Hyperborean and Lemurian epochs, massive proto-humanoids evolving toward matter, the Atlantean epoch, a civilization of high science and psychic power, and finally, the Aryan epoch, the current age, soon to end. To most, these are myths, but in myth lies a pattern, an awareness that human history is not a single road, but a spiral. What if the pre-flood world was the Golden Age? Not just in a symbolic sense, but a real, advanced civilization now erased. Its memory fragmented into Hindu yugas, Mayan worlds, and Greek myths. Its survivors scattered, becoming the seeders of later cultures, Egypt, Sumer, Mesoamerica. What if all these flood myths, these buried ruins, these anomalies, are not outliers, but artifacts from a previous cycle. Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids, the underwater structures of Yonaguni, or the shelf near Cuba. They do not belong in our story, because they belong to a story before ours. A linear history produces amnesia. We think of our ancestors as ignorant. We imagine ourselves as their inevitable conclusion. But a cyclical history invites humility. In it, we are not the first, and perhaps not the best. We are just one iteration in a cosmic loop of creation and collapse. One more dance of the eternal spiral. This is the wisdom echoed in Gnostic texts, in Hermetic doctrine, in indigenous oral traditions across the world. The idea that true knowledge is remembered, not invented. That time itself is an illusion, or at least a loop. Interestingly, modern science has begun to uncover its own cycles. The precession of equinoxes, a 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis, solar minimums and maximums, geomagnetic reversals, even civilizational cycles modeled in sociological data. The idea that human flourishing and collapse may follow environmental, solar, or cosmic rhythms is gaining traction. What was once myth may now be emerging science. Even the idea of a cyclical universe, the oscillating cosmos, has returned in theoretical physics. We may be remembering what the ancients never forgot. If time is cyclic, then we are not merely heading forward into the unknown. We are circling back to something forgotten, a truth submerged beneath time, beneath myth, beneath dust, and the signs are everywhere. Buried temples, lost cities, celestial alignments, recurring symbols. Even our dreams seem to know that there was something before and that it will return again. As the Maya believed, every end is a beginning. And as the ancients whispered, from stone to scroll, from pyramid to prophecy, the wheel of ages turns, and those who remember shall rebuild. If time is cyclic, then we are not merely heading forward into the unknown. We are circling back to something forgotten. We live atop the bones of forgotten worlds. Beneath our cities lie older cities, and beneath those, the eroded whispers of settlements, rituals, and beliefs erased by time. We dig foundations for skyscrapers and find the stones of temples. We unearth tools, bones, and fragments of art from people we long assumed were primitive. Yet their work suggests minds just as complex as ours, perhaps more in touch with something we have since lost. This is not merely archaeology, it is a confrontation with the limits of memory, both collective and personal. What if we are not the peak of a single ever-rising tower of progress? What if we are the latest cycle, the current crest of a wave that has risen and crashed many times before? This is the hypothesis of the great forgetting. Imagine this: you wake in a house, unsure of how you got there. Everything is new. The machines, the books, the architecture unfamiliar yet tailored for your species. You marvel at the design and believe you're the first, but you are not. You're merely the latest. This may be humanity's story. Civilizations may have risen to astonishing heights before, not necessarily in ways recognizable to our own trajectory, but rich in their own values, sciences, and cosmologies, only to collapse due to war, climate shifts, disease, or even cosmic catastrophe. Their knowledge, stored in perishable forms, bark, cloth, the spoken word, vanished like breath on glass. Their monuments eroded. Their stories became myths. Their gods became monsters. Their truths became fairy tales. All that remained were fragments. The flood myths, the strange alignments of ancient sites, the advanced glimpses hidden in archaic texts. If Earth has hosted more than one technologically advanced or spiritually evolved society, how would we even know? Civilizational amnesia is not merely possible, it's probable. Human culture has two main methods of remembering: oral tradition, written record. The former is resilient. It It travels across generations without tools, but it morphs. Like a long game of telephone, details are blurred, symbols reshaped. What begins as historical truth may become myth, allegory, religion. The latter writing is fragile. It requires tools, infrastructure, preservation. Fire, water, time, and human neglect erase it easily. Libraries can be burned, tablets shattered, scrolls eaten by insects. 1,000 years from now, how much of our digital data will survive? We trust in the permanence of our records, but they are stored on hard drives that require electricity, functioning infrastructure, and peaceful continuity. If collapse comes not necessarily through apocalypse, but simply entropy and disorder, will future generations know we ever existed? Consider how much we've already lost. We have no full record of the Library of Alexandria, no complete knowledge of Mohenjo-Daro, no explanation for the mathematical and astronomical precision of the Nazca lines, or how the Coricancha in Peru was built with such impossible engineering. Civilizations forget, cultures forget. Even the most powerful empires, Egypt, Rome, Maya, eventually collapse into ruins and mystery. We often believe that technology equals progress, that it is synonymous with civilization, but this is a myth of modernity. Our ancestors may not have had smartphones, satellites, or electricity, but they possessed technologies of consciousness, of stonework, of natural harmony that we cannot reproduce today. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned more precisely to true north than any modern building. The megalithic walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru use stones cut and fitted with such precision that even a razor blade cannot slip between them without mortar. The Antikythera mechanism, dated to 100 BCE, is a clockwork computer with astronomical sophistication. These aren't flukes. They are echoes of sophisticated minds using a very different kind of technology, one that may not leave digital fingerprints. In contrast, much of our modern world is built on ephemeral systems. Take away electricity, the internet, fuel, and mass communication, and how much knowledge would we retain? Would we know how to recreate a jet engine, a solar panel, a microprocessor? Or would the survivors fall back into oral culture, retelling strange stories about flying machines, glowing screens, and an ancient world of steel towers? Stories that future generations would call myths. In that light, we are not superior to the past, we are merely differently equipped. The Mahabharata speaks of weapons that could scorch the earth and turn day into night. The Popol Vuh remembers multiple creations of man, some failed, some erased. The Greeks told of the ages of man, golden, silver, bronze, and iron a decline, not an ascent. The Bible recalls a world before the flood, where angels mingled with mortals and giants walked the earth. What if these aren't merely stories? What if myth is a degraded form of memory, one passed down from the survivors of ancient cataclysms, encoded in metaphor, ritual, and dream? Carl Jung believed in the collective unconscious, where archetypes are born. What if ancient trauma, a flood, a fire from the sky, a world-ending collapse etched itself so deeply into our collective psyche that it still ripples through our myths today? The great forgetting is not about what we've lost. It's about what we've dimly remembered. In our obsession with linear progress, with new being better, we have blinded ourselves to the concept of cyclic time. To the Hopi, the Maya, the Hindus, the Greeks, and many others, time was not a line, but a circle, a wheel turning through ages, with each era doomed to end and begin again. The great forgetting occurs at the end of every cycle. First comes hubris, civilizations forgetting they are finite. Then decline moral, environmental, spiritual. Then collapse gradual or sudden. Then oblivion, ruins covered in earth, libraries lost, oral traditions warped. And then rebirth, a new dawn, a new age, with no memory of the age before. Except perhaps in dreams, in symbols, in stories that make no sense, until they do. The idea of the great forgetting isn't science fiction. It's the default setting of history. The last ice age ended around 11,600 years ago, the same time as the date given by Plato for the fall of Atlantis. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps it marks the end of a forgotten epoch. Göbekli Tepe, the sunken ruins of Dwarka, the Yonaguni monument, the Peri race map, the Baghdad battery, the anomalous depictions of global awareness in ancient art, all may be artifacts not of isolated genius, but of a world with a memory far older than we assume. When we see a myth repeated across cultures, the flood, the golden age, the descent into chaos, it is worth asking not what it represents, but what it remembers. We live in an age of extraordinary technological power and existential fragility. We possess the ability to modify our own genes, land robots on Mars, and simulate entire worlds. Yet we are also capable of self-erasure through nuclear war, ecological collapse, and digital entropy. In our cities of glass and code, we rarely look back. We rarely ask, what came before? But if we forget the past, we risk repeating it, or worse, never knowing it happened. What would it mean if we are not the first, but simply the latest? What if great forgetting is already underway? Will future generations look back at our time if they can, and find only fragments? Will they dig through the ruins of our cloud servers and plastic artifacts and wonder, who were these people? What gods did they worship? What caused their fall? And will our truths become myths or be forgotten entirely? What survives? Not the internet, not our buildings, not even language in its current form. What survives is symbol, story, stone, and spirit. The spiral, the circle, the flood, the descent, the ascent, the hero, the warning. These are the DNA of memory, the cultural genes that leap from one age to the next, even as names and forms change. To guard against the great forgetting, we must value wisdom over knowledge, insight over data, meaning over information. The ancients built in stone, not because it was easy, but because it would last. So too must we choose what we carve into the soul of the future. In the end, memory is not a vault, it is a living thing. And you, the listener, the dreamer, the wanderer in time are the archive. Every time you remember an old myth, question a historical certainty, walk among ruins and wonder, you participate in the great remembering. You revive the buried past. You resist the forgetting. And perhaps, in some distant age yet unborn, your whispers will be the echo that sparks the fire of memory once more. There's a quiet question echoing through all the ruins and myths we've uncovered. Could we be them? Could we be the long-lost people someone else will one day try to remember? We dig into the earth and find temples beneath our cities. We decode flood myths that predate our calendars. We marvel at star maps chiseled into stone by hands older than history. And still, we struggle to remember what happened yesterday. Now, in a time of satellites and smartphones, quantum code and global AI, what if we are not at the pinnacle of anything, but at the end of a forgotten spiral? What if the arc of history bends not forward, but around? Ancient cultures didn't see time as a line. They saw wheels, ages, yugas, calendars that reset like the breath of the cosmos. Hinduism teaches of the 4 yugas, cycling from spiritual purity to collapse. The Mayan long count ends and begins in great cosmic pulses. The Greeks spoke of gold, silver, bronze, and iron ages, each less noble than the last. What if these aren't metaphors? What if we are at the end of one such cycle, like the Atlantis of Plato, the builders of Göbekli Tepe, or the lost civilizations drowned by rising seas? And if that's true, are we still becoming history, or are we already its ghosts? Our modern world is built on volatile substrates, hard drives, cloud storage, code and electricity. Yet the ancients built in stone, in myth, in oral epics that lasted for millennia. If we vanish tomorrow, what would remain? Not our tweets or passwords, Not our screens or skyscrapers, but maybe the myths we left behind, the strange stories, the ruins underwater, the signals in the stars, a monolith left on the moon, a Voyager probe drifting through the void with a golden record no one knows how to play. We think we're too modern to be forgotten, but forgetting doesn't ask for permission. Imagine a distant future. A new people live on a changed Earth, or perhaps another world entirely. They find fragments, stone structures buried beneath sediment, solar panels shattered under vines, a half-legible carving of a blue globe. What will they say about us? Will they call us the gods of the old world, or fools who drowned their own cities? Will they invent stories to fill the gaps? Will our airplanes become dragons, our machines become magic, our data centers sacred tombs? Will we become myth? And if myth is all we leave, what kind will it be? For all our telescopes and microscopes, our theories and timelines, we still don't know what happened before the last ice melted. We debate if Atlantis was real. We argue over which came first, gods or grain. We still can't read some of the scripts carved into ancient stone. This isn't failure. It's a reminder, humility is truth. To look into the abyss of time and admit we don't know. To see the stars and wonder who else saw them. To find that a question is more powerful than an answer when spoken with reverence. Humanity stands at a fragile, beautiful intersection. We look up at galaxies spinning through black velvet skies. We dive down to ruins swallowed by the ocean's dark embrace. We are the only known species to dream of both origins and endings. We are storytellers, stargazers, ruin builders, myth makers. And maybe that's all we ever needed to be. Perhaps our true legacy is not in technology or empire, but in the simple act of trying to remember, of placing meaning in chaos, of carving a story into the flood. We are the children of mystery and the parents of myth. The final irony is this: every generation believes itself to be the most advanced, the most awake, the most aware. But maybe we are just one more version of the forgotten, a civilization born of fire and data, ending in silence, or rebirth, or both. One day, someone may unearth what we leave behind. They may ask, who were they? What did they believe? Why did they disappear? And maybe, just maybe, they'll whisper it like a secret between stars. These were the ancients. They dreamed of remembering. In the end, what endures? Not the machines, not the maps, not the dates. What endures is the question, the whisper beneath the flood, the longing beneath the stars, the echo in stone. So we ask once more, not as historians, not as skeptics, but as humans. Are we the ancients of tomorrow? And will anyone remember what we tried to say?